Hello and welcome to the Safety First webinar at POAH Communities. This week's webinar is on emergency plan review. In this training course, you will learn how to develop an emergency action plan based on hazards and other potential emergencies, assign responsibilities to employees, understand the process of deploying an emergency action plan, learn the initial steps in handling medical, fire, and other emergencies, as well as addressing natural disasters that may affect your property. The course will discuss developing an emergency action plan for your property to respond to medical emergencies, fire emergencies, extended power loss, chemical spills, telephone bomb threats, severe weather, and natural disasters, as well as end with a summary. When emergency response procedures are known, practiced, and followed in emergency situations, the emergencies will result in fewer injuries and damage to a facility. Emergency action plans, or EAPs, provide step-by-step procedures for site staff to follow in case of an emergency, such as fire, chemical spills, or major accidents. EAPs also address natural disasters that can affect our properties, such as floods, hurricanes, or tornadoes. The emergency action plan includes information such as who to notify in the case of an emergency and who has been assigned evacuation, rescue, medical, or critical plan operation tasks. The EAP must also include the name and job title of every employee who may be contacted for information about the plan or for an explanation of the assigned duties. EAPs must be made in writing, kept in the workplace, preferably in the office, and available for review. However, if an employer has 10 or fewer employees, the plan may be communicated orally. In our case, we always want it in writing and available in case there is visitors to the site that need to know the emergency action plan procedures. The first step in developing an emergency action plan is deciding who will develop, implement, and maintain that plan. Currently at your site, make sure that employees are participating in development of this plan and understand the ramifications of this plan. The emergency plan needs to include all parts of the property that may be impacted in the event of emergency. Some properties may have separate plans for each part of their facility. This could include commercial areas, it could include kitchens, things of that nature, as well as other more dangerous things on our site, such as the handling of hazardous materials. When developing a plan, you need to start by determining the hazards present at your property that could cause an emergency. You also want to list other types of emergencies that could impact your property externally, such as power failures or weather emergencies. This is going to vary depending on geographic location, maybe the types of business that your commercial tenants rely on, or the size of the property. You next need to consider all components of the property and how each potential emergency could affect each component. This could include the possibility of a long-term shutdown for your property. Consider any offices, residential areas, and remote locations that could impact organizational operations. Develop a response for all potential emergencies, and once the scope of the necessary preparation is defined, a plan needs to be developed and implemented to cover each of these areas. Once the scope of the plan and hazards are defined, the plan needs to designate specific individuals on your staff as responsible for various tasks. These tasks may include reporting the emergency, both internally to other site staff on site, or externally up the chain of command into the regional and corporate level, as well as summoning outside assistance. This also includes monitoring the evacuation of the property, performing rescue, medical, or critical plan operation duties before evacuating, and determining closure periods. In many cases, the rescue, medical, or critical plan operation duties may fall under local authorities who are trained appropriately for that type of work. In addition, if there are any utilities in danger of being affected by the emergency, that utility company needs to be contacted by an assigned individual on site. If chemical spills are also a possibility, an individual needs to be assigned to address those cleanups and report that spill. The expectations of each of these responsible employees need to be addressed in detail in the plan, and this may include additional training on assigned tasks if necessary. Once the potential emergencies are determined and the employee responsibilities are assigned, you must outline the procedures that the property will go through during an emergency in detail. These procedures will be specific to the hazard response and those affected by that hazard. Procedures will include the following: what to do in the event of a fire or other emergency, including evacuation procedures and exit routes, how to report emergencies and alert employees, how to account for all employees after an evacuation, and what to do in the event that you need to close for business, how to respond to natural disasters, such as where to assemble if the workplace is threatened by a tornado, hurricane, or flood, and how employees will be trained and how often. EAPs should always include evacuation maps for the benefit of the site staff as well as visitors and residents. The following information at a minimum is noted on these maps: emergency exits, primary and secondary evacuation routes, locations of fire extinguishers, fire alarm pull station locations, and assembly areas where a head count should be conducted. If an evacuation map does not exist for your building currently, or you're not aware of one, please make sure you can contact me or contact your manager or regional to find out more about that plan. The EAP must specify how often evacuation drills are conducted. Usually that is done annually, and additionally, if there are any changes in the workplace or procedures, it is done again, just to familiarize the staff as well as residents with that issue. Once a detailed plan has been developed that outlines the requirements in the event of an emergency, the resulting policy should be distributed to all site staff. You also should have a different version for residents so that they know what to do in the event of emergency. Both staff and residents should be trained somewhat on the plan so that they understand expectations and responsibilities when evacuating the building. The training will include most of the following for both parties: the threats and hazards of the site, the appropriate emergency response procedures, procedures for notification, warning, and communication, specifically to residents, location of evacuation routes and on-site shelters, also very important for residents, location of fire extinguishers, alarms, and other emergency equipment, how often practice drills are conducted, duties specific to individuals assigned to various roles, such as medical, rescue, or shutdown responsibilities, and other hazards unique to the job site that affect employees. Emergency action plans need to be reviewed and updated on an annual basis, and all changes need to be communicated to both staff and those that are applicable to residents. Emergency action plans address how medical assistance is provided as well. Typically, in the event of an emergency, the EAP directs staff to do the following: first, call for help by shouting to nearby staff or residents, then call the appropriate emergency phone numbers as soon as possible. Who to call should be noted in the EAP and will depend on whether your facility has a formal internal medical program or relies on local emergency services. Typically, our sites rely on local emergency services in the event of a medical emergency. If unsure whether the situation is an emergency, it's always important to call 911, and the dispatcher will ask the appropriate questions and assist in providing appropriate care. Make sure you're providing the following information to the dispatcher: the nature of the medical emergency, the location of the emergency, including the address, the building, the room number or floor. If applicable, you want to also have your name and the phone number you're calling from. Do not move a victim unless it is absolutely necessary, such as when there is an imminent danger from fire, explosion, or electrocution. Workplaces without formal internal medical programs usually have employees trained in first aid, including CPR and AED use. If there are employees on site that are trained and up to date in their certifications for CPR or AED use, they should notify our local offices, our managers, to understand exactly how they can help on a site. When a fire is discovered, EAPs typically direct employees to activate the nearest fire alarm. Fire alarm pull stations, such as the one pictured, alert the local fire department as well as sounding an alarm. If no manual or automatic alarm is available, immediately notify the local fire department by calling 911. Notify the site personnel designated in the EAP about the fire emergency by the specified method, which may be voice communication, radio, phone, or some other method. Immediately after being notified of a fire emergency, all occupants in the property, including visitors, must leave the building using designated evacuation routes. Assemble in the designated area as detailed in the emergency action plan. Remain outside until the assigned competent authority announces that it is safe to re-enter. In many cases, this is the emergency responders from the local fire department. Report any problems to the emergency coordinator at the assembled area. The work area monitor or the emergency coordinator should be identified in the emergency action plan and must ensure that all physically challenged staff or residents are assisted in an emergency evacuation. In addition, they must sweep their assigned areas to confirm that all employees and visitors have evacuated the area, if it is safe to do so. Once they reach the designated assembly area, they must perform an accurate head count and report any missing personnel to the responsible individual. Of course, it is important to account for all residents and staff. Unfortunately, because of the size of our property, this is not always the case. Make sure that you are able to account for all staff that come out of the building, and make sure that you're able to at least get an understanding of how many people are in your building at a given time to be able to understand who may be missing, who may not be missing. It's really not your obligation to sweep a building if there is a huge blazing fire. The reality of it is that we want to make sure that we keep our residents safe as much as possible without putting ourselves in danger. Other designated personnel in the EAP may be required to do the following tasks: operate fire extinguishers, disconnect utilities or equipment that could be damaged if it is left operating, or that could create additional hazards to an emergency responders, unless doing so jeopardizes their safety. Shut windows and doors before evacuating if it is safe to do so. Provide the fire personnel with necessary information about the facility and head count. And if not possible to return to the area after the emergency, be able to perform an assessment and coordinate emergency closing procedures. Extinguish the fire only if all of the following criteria are met. Fire department has been notified, the fire is small and not spreading to other areas, escaping the area is possible by backing up to the nearest exit, the fire extinguisher is in working condition, you are trained to use the fire extinguisher and you are assigned to do so in your EAP. In the event of an extended power loss to our property, certain precautionary measures must be taken by authorized personnel, depending on the location and the environment of the property. Determine which measures apply to your property and include them in the emergency action plan. Make sure you're turning off any unnecessary electrical equipment and appliances, because power restoration could cause a surge that damages electronics and other sensitive equipment. If the facility is likely to experience freezing temperatures during a long-term power loss, turn off and drain the following: the fire sprinkler system, standpipes, potable water lines, toilets. Add non-toxic antifreeze to drains to prevent drain traps from freezing. Move equipment containing fluids that may freeze due to long-term exposure to freezing temperatures to heated areas, and either drain the liquid or provide the equipment with an auxiliary heat source. Upon the restoration of heat and power, electronic equipment should be brought up to ambient temperatures before energizing the prevent condensation from forming on circuitry. After the heat has been restored to the facility and water has been turned back on, authorized personnel will check fire and water piping for leaks from freeze damage. If your facility handles large amounts of chemicals or other hazardous substances, including procedures for handling spills in your EAP, then it may be necessary to keep these in mind. Fortunately, we do not carry large amounts of chemicals. In the event of a chemical spill, we need to make sure we have the material safety data sheets appropriately on hand and available to go in an emergency with the affected victim. Make sure when you see a chemical spill and it affects someone, you need to make sure you're dealing with the spill according to the SDS and review the spill cleanup procedures as appropriate. Going further into telephone bomb threats, the number of bomb threats has been increasing in more recent years, and responses to bomb threats are included in many organizations' emergency action plans. Make sure you're treating all bomb threats seriously. In the event of a telephone bomb threat, stay calm and be courteous, listen, and do not interrupt the caller. Keep the caller talking as long as possible. As you listen, fill out a checklist, which is available from the Federal Emergency Management Agency's website, as fully as possible with observations about the caller. If it's possible to do so, write a note to a colleague to call authorities while you're still on the phone. At the end of the call, do the following. Hang the phone and do not answer if it rings again. Call personnel responsible for corporate security functions and provide emergency about the call. If a description of the bomb location was given, communicate this information and determine whether the caller appeared familiar with the facility by the description of the bomb location. Write out the caller's message in its entirety and any other comments on a separate sheet of paper and attach to the checklist, and notify your supervisor immediately. Emergency action plans typically include procedures to follow if natural disasters are common in the area that threaten the workplace. This particularly could be in our properties in Missouri, where tornadoes are common, as well as in our properties in Florida, where we have hurricanes. When a tornado warning is issued by sirens or other means, immediately go to your designated on-site shelter. If there is no on-site shelter, go to a windowless interior room or hallway on the lowest floor of the building. Stay away from outside walls and windows. Use your arms to protect your head and neck. Remain sheltered until the designated individual announces that the tornado threat is over. This is described as sheltering in place. Luckily, we do not have a portfolio that is extremely affected by earthquakes. But in the event that we are affected by earthquakes can occur almost any time of the year, and are impossible to predict. Most earthquake-related injuries result from collapsing walls, flying glass, and falling objects as a result of the ground shaking, or people trying to move more than a few feet during the shaking. If an earthquake starts, immediately get under a close-by sturdy desk, table, or other protective structure and hold on to it. Protect your eyes by keeping your head down. Keep away from overhead fixtures, windows, filing cabinets, and electrical power sources. Stay in your safe place and remain calm until your designated emergency coordinator gives an all-clear signal or issues further directions, or until the shaking stops. If a flood or tsunami alert is issued and you are indoors, be ready to evacuate, as directed by your emergency coordinator or other designated official, and follow the recommended primary or secondary evacuation routes. If the alert is issued and you are working outdoors, for example at a remote job site, follow evacuation routes or climb to high ground and stay there. Avoid walking or driving through floodwaters. If your vehicle stalls, abandon it immediately and climb to higher ground. The nature of a hurricane provides for more warning than other natural weather disasters. A hurricane watch is issued when a hurricane becomes a threat to a coastal area. A hurricane warning is issued when hurricane winds of 74 miles an hour or higher, a combination of dangerous high water and rough seas expected in the area within 24 hours. Stay calm and wait instructions from your emergency coordinator or other designated official. Monitor local TV and radio stations for updates. Employees designated in the EAP may be asked to secure the building against winds and possible flooding and to repair machinery and equipment for a power loss. If you are at your workplace when a hurricane hits and it's no longer safe to evacuate, remain indoors. Choose a shelter with the following options: small interior room without windows on the lowest floor, a hallway away from doors and windows on the lowest floor, or a room with no windows constructed with reinforced concrete, brick, or block. Blizzards are another emergency that can be predicted in advance. If a blizzard occurs and you don't have time to evacuate your workplace, stay calm, await instructions from emergency coordinator or other designated official, and stay indoors. If there is no heat, close off unneeded rooms or areas, stuff towels or rags in the cracks in the doors, cover the windows at night, eat and drink. Food provides the body with energy and heat. Fluids prevent dehydration. Wear layers of loose-fitting, lightweight, warm clothing if available. If the event there is no heat, we certainly want to make sure that you're accounting for all your residents' needs as going forward. This is a really big problem, and it needs to be addressed with the cooperation with everybody on our team. If your property is an area prone to blizzards and staff work at remote areas, you're more frequently on the road. Include in your EAP procedures for them to follow if they become stranded in a vehicle during a blizzard. This is not just for employees who are working remotely or working far away from their home, but employees in general. It's important to understand the safe procedures when getting caught in a blizzard in a car. Stay in the vehicle, run the motor about 10 minutes each hour, open the windows a little for fresh air to avoid carbon monoxide poisoning, make sure the exhaust pipe is not blocked, make yourself visible to rescuers, turn on the dome light at night when running the engine, tie a colored cloth to your antenna or door, raise the hood after the snow stops falling, and exercise to keep blood circulating and to keep warm. An emergency action plan is a written or oral outlining steps at workplace that will develop in the event of an emergency. It includes procedures for reporting emergencies, evacuating a facility, or sheltering in place as appropriate, accounting for all employees, and responding to emergency situations. EAPs also designate employees responsible for rescue, medical, and critical plant operations. Employee training will ensure that employees and residents know the procedures and their roles when emergencies strike. Possible emergency situations include medical, fire, power, chemical, and bomb threats. Severe weather and natural disasters such as tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, and blizzards, depending on a property's geographic location, also need to be addressed. If you do not currently have an emergency action plan at your site or an evacuation map, please make sure you're contacting me to be able to create these plans or be able to give you these plans. We hope you had a great day, and I hope you learned a lot. Thanks so much. Have a great day.